So we'll go from claims into risk management. So some of the things that Corby talked about gets you start to think about things that might be happening now that could be, you're going to need to be talking to Corby on later. And that's more where I start coming in. You know, looking around the room, some of you guys call me pretty regularly with questions about, this is coming up, we're just wondering what should we do with this? Should we have a policy on this? Should we start talking to an attorney now? And that's where you can get in touch with me, because I spend a lot of time with members on trying to identify the risks that they have. So one of your departments is coming to you and they have a new program. I'm going to pick on somebody here without pointing them out, but a few years back, one of the counties had some employees come to them and say, hey, we've got this great new program that we'd like to do in the county where we'd like to go in and insulate people's homes. And then we will get the credit back from Questar for having insulated their home. So we're going to insulate their home for nothing. But then the county will get money back. They sign over their Questar rebate to the county, and that's how we pay for the program. This will be awesome. And you know, the risk manager there, the coordinator there called me, and we talked about it, and we said, you know, there's some real risk here, but it sounded real good to the commissioners, and certainly the employees that wanted to do this, have these jobs where they would go out and insulate the homes, sounded good, so they moved forward with the program, even though we told them there were some risk. And it was a year or so down the road when one elderly gentleman sued the county for a lot of money because he was claiming that he now had all types of illnesses that came from putting that insulation in his home. And so he needed a new house, he needed all of his medical treatments paid for, and things of that sort. Things that you know, so again, as the coordinator, if coordinator also means you're acting as the risk manager within your county, those are things that when new programs come to you like that, just give me a call and let's talk through what additional liability it might be creating for the county that others might not be thinking of when they're looking at it and just looking at how does this bring in revenue or how does this look good to constituents. You need to look at both sides.
Do we have an attorney-client privilege anytime we talk with you or anyone on the staff, or is it just you, or how's that?
Not attorney-client, because none of us are attorneys. However, there are items when you are using our pre-litigation legal services. So we're beyond just trying to identify a risk with a new program. Now we've got a situation that we know we're moving towards a situation where somebody's going to sue, whether it's an employment situation where we're disciplining someone and we figure, yeah, they're going to sue if we discipline them, certainly if we fire them, or planning and zoning where both sides are saying, if you approve that permit, we're suing. If you don't approve the permit, we're suing. You know it's going to go that direction. Now you can call our attorneys and then you and start talking to the defense attorneys now at no cost so that they can help you with that process to make sure that the claim is as defendable as possible when you're actually in court. And that's attorney-client privilege. At this stage, so I try and help you identify if there is a risk or liability involved with the new thing that you're going to do or the expansion of the area that you're going to do. Try and assess that risk, just how much risk is it that the county is taking as they do that, or the department? Because again, I understand that there are certain things that the county has to do anyway, even though there's risk attached to it. But I think part of our jobs should be to make sure that the commission knows what level of risk are they taking by moving forward with this new program, or by expanding this department, or doing whatever it is that they're looking at, passing a new policy. And from there, we can work on what loss control strategies can we put in place to try and reduce the possibility that a claim will be filed, or if a claim is going to be filed, reduce the cost that that claim is going to end up costing the county. And there are, you know, a whole myriad of different types of loss control strategies. Everything from, you know, okay, you want to build a new horse arena at the fairgrounds and just let the public come and use the horse arena. Of course, there's risk there, right? But under the state statute, we have the equine immunity available to us that if you post a sign that has the language specifically that's in the statute and post it at your new horse arena, people can't sue you when they get injured at that horse arena. There are certain types of immunities like that throughout the statutes that we can take advantage of, that by talking through these situations with me, we can identify those types of situations and try and reduce and make the county at least more comfortable and doing everything they can from a loss control standpoint to keep claims from occurring. They will, you know, regularly review waivers and contracts and things with the counties that we'll talk about. That can also be a loss control strategy. Yeah, we don't like having to do this. We're using a vendor to do it, so let's reduce our loss by making sure that we transfer as much of the liability to the contractor that we're hiring through the contract. Something I can assist with too. And then at the end of the day, if it's a new program or activity is going to move forward no matter what we say, and for some reason we're concerned that it's a high risk, there's not much we can do to control the risk, and it's a risk that we're not comfortable is covered clearly and definitively by a UCIP, then we can also help, will also help you make sure that we've got coverage placement in place with a traditional insurance company. Because some of the times, and often of you, how many of you get handed a contract to look over to review whether or not it's a good idea to enter into the contract and it's already signed? Because you send them on to me all the time. And so it's not so much what can we do to reduce the risk, identify the risk. It doesn't take long to see what the risk is as you read through a contract. We can't do a whole lot with the loss strategies because we can't change now the language in the contract to transfer risk back to the contractor. We've already agreed to it, but we can decide, do you want that risk going against UCIP, or do we want to just go out and get a traditional policy? And sometimes the contracts that are signed before they're handed to you say you will provide standard insurance from an insurance company, and that's not UCIP. So in those situations, sometimes we need to go and actually buy you a policy. If we can't go back with the contractor and negotiate change to the contract right out of the gates to allow for your self-insured program, then we'll get that other coverage in place. So those are kind of the primary areas of risk management consultation that I assist you with. Again, part of that is contract review, looking at the indemnity provisions. To what extent does the county expect that that other party that they're working with is going to pay for claims that are filed against you? That's a big issue. What the insurance provisions say in those contracts, and again, depending on the types of services that are going to be provided, the level of risk that is associated there, and there's always some politics that play into this too, right? How much insurance are you going to ask of that other party? It's interesting, generally when you're hiring someone to do some work, especially if they're not a local vendor, it's no problem asking for a lot of insurance. But all of a sudden when you're hiring a local vendor, now the commission doesn't want to be asking them to buy all that much insurance. And if any of you that work with the event centers and the fair and things like that, all of a sudden we don't want to make them buy any insurance. So all of that I can work with you on as far as what's reasonable and how to write those insurance provisions to try and protect the county while not upsetting your politically minded officials that are trying to make sure that people can use the county facilities and not at reasonable expense. help with sample language. Sample language is difficult because it needs to be different for every situation, really. Especially the indemnity provisions. I know people say, well, we have our standard indemnity provision. Well, when you're hiring contractors to do road work, and you're hiring contractors to provide social services, and you're hiring contractors to clean the building, the indemnity provisions on all of those should be different. You should have a different expectation of what they're going to protect the county for, or the district for. So yes, there is some standardized language that goes into the indemnity provision, but each indemnity provision we should be looking at each time and be comfortable that we're asking for the right thing. And I do a lot of trainings directly with the county attorneys on that piece. But certainly, if you're concerned about contracts that you're seeing with, the one sentence indemnity provision, don't hesitate to send it on to me, and I'll work with you and your county attorney or your other legal counsel to get that taken care of. And then sometimes it gets down to the point where you're in negotiations with a contractor and you're telling them that you want changes to the contract, and they just won't budge. I'm happy to get involved in those discussions too, especially where the area that they won't budge is on the indemnity provision or on insurance that either you're requiring them to have, or if they're requiring you to have insurance. I'll get involved in those negotiations and play the bad insurance guy and work to try and get them to understand why they should accept the coverage that you've got with UCIP. It's often far broader than what they asked for in their contract, but they, for some reason, their contracts say that it's going to come from an A-rated insurance carrier, which we are not. So they're fine with having less coverage, as long as from an insurance company that they don't know, rather than getting more coverage from a government agency that cannot go bankrupt and must pay all of its claims. I'm not sure. So I'll have that conversation with them in negotiations and get them either way to understand why the county needs them to have the insurance they're requiring, or that they are accepting of the coverage that you have. Okay. Over time, we've made a lot of service enhancements in the program, and I get involved in a lot of that to make sure that we're continually identifying the needs of the membership, and especially as we've expanded in the last few years with more districts and other interlocals and other government county-based agencies. There's been new needs that we've expanded some of the services for. Just as an example, we do in-house service expansion where our staff does more of the services provided to the membership. Sometimes we expand through partner organizations like our online training organization that we've hired, that we buy the online training courses for you, and you're able to use those. And it's a nice, neat package. You don't have to have a contractual relationship with that vendor. We do it, and because we buy it for all the counties, we get a great rate on that training. Far less than what any of you are trying to negotiate with them on your own would. And some of those new vendor provided services, so sometimes it's an expansion of a partner organization like our workers' compensation program, where we ask Workers' Compensation Fund to expand their services that they provide. A couple of years ago, one of the services we provide is every member, we purchase your membership in the Utah Safety Council, so that you don't have to purchase it separately. When I looked at that years ago, I found that some counties weren't members, which it's a great organization, you should be. Some counties had multiple memberships. The road department had a membership, the county had a membership, the HR department had a membership, and so we consolidated all of that. We pay for one membership, and they provide an awful lot of good safety training and advice. When we partnered with the Workers' Compensation Fund to provide the workers' comp coverages for the members, we realized that they were both, the Safety Council and Workers' Comp Fund were both providing those safety services. So we talked to them about, can you coordinate a little bit more on providing those services when you're working with our members? And ultimately, it led to a big partnership beyond just the counties for the Workers' Compensation Fund and Utah Safety Council. But it started with us asking them, those partner organizations that were already partners of ours, to expand that. And then sometimes it's a new vendor like the online services that we provide. And then we also coordinate with UAC and other affiliates and other agencies to expand services. Right now, I'm working with the County Auditors Association. They've been pressured by the State Auditor's Office to assure that every county has a fraud tip line in place that people can call into and give tips on fraud that they see happening in the counties. And so I'm working with the County Auditors Association to create one statewide fraud tip line that all counties can call into, again, to save costs and also just make it more comfortable for people that they're not calling the county to provide a tip about somebody at the county. They're calling some outside agency to provide that tip. So if there are needs that you see that your county has related to risk that you think is a good thing, that would be good to share that same service with other members and do it through an interlocal, that's a discussion that we can have, that I can help out with, and we can create services that way. Coverage modifications is another area that I spend a lot of time with. Expanding coverage as your risks increase, and make sure that we've got all the proper limits that we need. I'm negotiating right now with our reinsurance carriers because our first layer of coverage for the liability is $3 million, and then we go to excess carriers for everything over $3 million. And the way our coverage form is written right now, you've got unlimited number of $3 million claims, and then you have excess $2 million for every claim above that for $5 million per claim. But the legislature this year increased the tort cap to $3 million. So our first layer of coverage is exactly what the tort cap in Utah is. And so before the first escalator goes onto that $3 million tort cap next year, I need to renegotiate and get higher limits put in place so that we've got that taken care of, and that first layer will be whatever the tort cap is or higher.
I would assume that's going to raise premiums to the county.
It shouldn't, right out of the gates, Kelly. We checked with our reinsurers early on, because when the bill first came, the legislator was telling us that it was going to go to 10 million. And so I got a quote of how much is it going to cost if we have to raise our limits from 5 million per occurrence to 10 million per occurrence. And that would have caused an immediate increase in our costs by the reinsurance. So we would have passed that along as rate increases to the counties. But with it just moving up the $500,000 from about $2.5 million to $3 million, I don't know that we get a credit for our good tort cap here in Utah with our reinsurers. That may move just a little bit.
The only reason I ask is I think I looked at like our property tax tort liability, and I think we're at the max, and it obviously doesn't cover the total cost of the tort liability. So if they're going to raise that, they need to raise how much property tax you charge to tort liability. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does. And that's something that you want to talk with the auditor about, because you're covering that tort liability through an interlocal entity, you can go above this cap on the tax.
So you can go over the state statute tax amount because it doesn't cover the true cost.
Right. Yes. Yeah. It's been a while since I've worked on that piece. I'm trying to remember which county it was, but somebody was bumping up against that cap for what they can tax for. And because you're doing it as through an interlocal agency agreement, you can go beyond that tax rate. But I can talk with you and your auditor about that. Developing new coverages to address new member risks as they are created is another area that I worked with when counties started saying the state grant that we get every year, they won't give us the grant anymore unless we show them that we have a cyber liability policy. And even though we didn't exclude cyber liability from our coverage form, the state wouldn't accept that because it wasn't a separate cyber liability policy. So we changed our form. We excluded cyber liability from the general liability, and then we created a whole new cyber liability policy form so that we would come into compliance with the state so that you could continue to keep your grant monies flowing. And those sorts of things, again, I'll work on with you to make sure that we are not impeding you from being able to do your work and get your grant monies that you want in different areas. Modifying coverage to comply with new laws, and from time to time we have to deal with that to make sure that we've got all the coverages in place. An example there, just recently, a question was asked about the level of crime coverage that has to be provided for the treasurer based on the amount of money that they handle. Everyone had interpreted the law a certain way that the $2.5 million of coverage under the crime coverage that we provide to all of you was adequate for even our largest counties, and the rest of you all just benefited from having a very high limit, even though you didn't need it to be that high. But just a couple of weeks ago, I met with the Money Management Council, and they confirmed for me that they don't interpret it the same way everybody else has been all these years. And so now we're in the process right now of increasing that crime coverage from $2.5 million to $10 million, because our larger counties need $10 million for their treasurers, so we will increase that for everyone. The good news is it's not a huge increased cost for us to get that extra $7.5 million in coverage. And now we're at the max that we shouldn't need it. No county would need more than that. But that's an example of where new laws or new interpretations of laws, we go back and rather than developing a new product for you to buy, we look at our coverage and make sure that you've got what you need to be in compliance. And then every now and then we've got to consider some limitations on the coverage to limit and avoid risk, undue risk to the pool, because we want to make sure that the pool is there forever. So the only exclusionary move that I can think of that we've made, well, I know it's the only one that we've made really, in the 10 years I've been here, is when we adopted a securities violation exclusion, which was standard everywhere else in the industry. We just had never had one. So we adopted a exclusion to claims that arise out of a securities. You invested in something and lost money on it, and now the taxpayers are suing you because you lost money on your investment. That's not covered by insurance.
What happened in Orange County, California,
Right. But we do keep an eye on that. And luckily, again, because when I talked about negotiating with our reinsurers, we believe in pooling so much that we pool ourselves. Our catastrophic insurance is a pool of all the county pools around the country going together and have their own captive insurance company for the catastrophic losses. So it makes this part of my job much easier, because instead of going and trying to beat my head against a brick wall with a Travelers or a Munich or one of those big reinsurance companies, Swiss Re or any of those, I'm going down and sitting down with other directors of other county pools in other states and negotiating the coverage that I need here in Utah. It makes it much easier.
What's the cap on that? What's the cap on
Their layer goes up to $5 million, and then beyond that, then they're buying reinsurance on a group basis.
So we're covered under our full liability of that.
Well, you're covered $5 million per occurrence, every claim, and it's seamless. You're not involved. You don't have a relationship with the reinsurers. That's all UCIP. So we pay our self-insured retention of $250,000 on each claim. Then the next layer is paid by the pool of pools through the NACO program, County Reinsurance Limited. And then when we get to their layer, then we go into the next layers, which is primarily AIG is the primary, and then several different Lloyd's of London names. On the property, it's a little bit different. We even go beyond and we have a quota share of the reinsurance on the property. So we're constantly working there to keep the reinsurance rates low for all of the pools, to keep our rates low.
Do you shop those rates?
What do you mean shop those rates?
Or you reinsurance?
We belong to a pool. Yeah. So I sit on both the underwriting committee and the investment committee and the chair of the investment committee. But the underwriting committee, yeah, we have a broker that goes out and markets their reinsurance every single year. Okay. And again, when I'm negotiating with them, I'm looking at the pricing that UCIP has, the limits of coverage that we're provided, and the coverages that were provided, as well as looking at new coverages as well. They're regularly adding new coverages. The market's been pretty good, particularly in the property area the last few years. So when we go in and negotiate on the property reinsurance with the reinsurers, generally they don't want to lower the rate a whole lot, but they'll throw in new coverages. And so we let those trickle down to you and improve our coverages. I spent a bit of time on organizational compliance, making sure that we're compliant with the state auditor, the Money Management Council, and the Uniform Fiscal Procedures. Where that benefits you guys is we're a government too, UCIP is, so we really understand what your obligations are, especially you guys that are districts and interlocals, that we have to do business just like you do. So we know when trouble is coming from the state auditor's office, or a new change has been made at the Money Management Council, or the Budget Act has changed and we need to be making changes, and we regularly talk with you and make sure that you're aware of those things as well. And then the member relations, and this is one thing that I want to make sure that you guys understand. You know, we work with you on a regular basis, but when you need somebody to come out and help discuss and explain things with your other elected officials, that's where I come in. It can be really helpful for you to make sure that they understand the pool, what it does for you, and all the different things that we do, because we get a lot of new officials that come in and they're from the private side, and they see insurance and they think, okay, well, where are we going to get a quote on insurance? But we're much, much more than insurance, as those of you who work with us for a while know. Anytime that you need me to come out, or even just to come out and bring your elected officials up to speed on where is your organization from a risk standpoint. If your experience mod's been going up, or you've had a bunch of claims lately, I'm more than happy to come out and just do a meeting and talk about where is the county, how are you doing, how are you comparing to others, what can we do to improve your risk portfolio. I can do that. I attend all the sheriff's meetings because those guys create a lot of our claims, unfortunately. But they've got that job that nobody else wants, nobody else will take. They've got to do it. No matter how much risk is involved, we gotta arrest them, we gotta lock them up. So I spend a lot of time with them to keep that risk low. And then I also regularly attend the other UAC affiliate meetings, the clerk auditors, the summer workshop, treasurer's workshop, and regularly present to those guys at their conferences, just to make sure that they are up to speed on what's going on in their areas. And then lastly, with legislative coordination, I have been getting more and more involved each year with things that are going on in the legislature, which are risk-oriented. And I remember back when I first got into this business and started taking risk management courses and things, and they talked about the risk of the legislative risk that is there. And it truly is. I mean, you can have a bad court case that changes the risk that's involved with different things, but at least you can see that coming. You're involved in that court case, or you're watching that court case as it's progressing. These guys, I mean, they have an idea that they wake up in the middle of the night with. The next day it's a bill, and a couple weeks later it's getting signed by the governor, and we all have to live with it. So at UAC and UCIP, we keep a close eye on what's going on there at the legislature, make sure that we're aware of what new legislation is going to change the way that we have to do our jobs. Like Corby talked about, the change this year to the whole process of getting a claim in, a notice of claim. That now, so it used to be those notices of claim would come in, and I'll get it down to the county attorney's office at some point, and then it gets over to Corby at some point, but it's no big deal because nobody says anything in 60 days. It's just assumed that we denied it. You can't do that anymore. Now you're in trouble if you don't tell them that you've received that claim. So watching the legislature, making sure that we know that those things are going on is really important. So I coordinate with the staff at UAC and cover some of the more directly risk-related issues, and then work with them on some of the other legislation that has a small risk component. I also meet with the CIPLAC, which is the Civil Attorneys Legislative Action Committee, the county attorneys that get together during the legislative session to work on things, and we're very active with that group. I've been placed on a couple of different study groups that the legislature has created over the years. The tort cap study group that they had a couple of years, and this year I was just assigned to the new study group that will look at whether or not we presume that anytime a public safety officer claims that they have post-traumatic stress syndrome, that we presume that that is work-related and it's a workers' compensation injury. Rather than them having to prove that something happened at work to cause PTSD, we just assume that because they're public safety, it is PTSD. And so the legislature this year created a study group to look at that and have me on that study group. So I'm already in touch with other states that have that same law being pushed by their firefighters and police associations to get information on what's going on there to share with that group. Again, I work with the Sheriff's Association because there's always bills related to the Sheriff's Department that we want to make sure that don't put us in a bad situation from a risk standpoint, and then the other affiliates as well, where I can help the treasurers a couple of years back with the bonding statutes at the legislature. So that's kind of where I spend my time. Again, those of you, some of you guys I talk to almost every single week. Those that I don't, feel free to pick up the phone. Believe me, I would much rather spend hours with you on this phone talking about an issue before it's a problem than the 20 minutes when you call and say, I'm sending a claim to Corby. Probably should have talked to you about this sooner, but don't hesitate. I'll make the time. Give me a call and we'll talk things through.